In just the last few days, President Trump has demanded unconditional surrender from the Iranian side. Then he says, well, actually, you know what? Maybe the war's almost over. It's going to be over very soon. And then last night, well, there's really not much left to shoot at. And then now today, we are just going to keep on pounding them. What is America's objective? What is President Trump even trying to do? I'm not sure that even he knows. But we're going to try to figure out what this is going to mean, because it's all over the world. Half the world is involved in one form or another in the Middle East. And to try and distort the fact from the fiction and what in the heck is going on, we have back with this Glenn Diesen, one of the hottest new YouTube channels going on right now, as he's just been on fire. Glenn, welcome back to the show. Good to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me back. And yeah, thanks for the nice introduction.
Well, listen, what in the world is going on with the messaging coming out of the White House? I mean, one would ordinarily think that when a nation's going to go to war, they will have given a lot of thought to it. They would have put out the potential cost, the potential risks. If things go bad, what would you do? But what is going to be your objectives? What resources are you going to put to it? And what is going to be your messaging? What are you trying to do? You would think, in a general term, that's what a country would do. But holy cow, just in the last 48 hours, we have literally been all over the map. We're going to talk about some of that here. But what do you make of this really just scatter shooting messaging?
Oh, I think it's essentially the government looking for another objective, what to be achieved, because the goal that was set was regime change, and there would be nothing else on the table. But as we've seen, the regime change failed. Killing Khamenei didn't topple the government. All it did was put someone less moderate into place, and it stoked all the nationalist sentiments in Iran, as it would in any other country if it's attacked by a foreign power. So as we see now from the United States, there's push for Trump to pull the U.S. out of this war. And even from Israel, we're getting some reports in the media that they don't think that Iran's going to either collapse or capitulate. So something else has to be done. And I think after regime change failed, there was an effort to pivot a bit. That is, what we want to do is degrade their ballistic missiles stockpile and ability to produce weapons. And this is a nice flexible goal. Indeed, if the Iranians fire some missiles at the Gulf states and Israel, now, technically their stockpile has been reduced. So, that's one way of declaring victory. But there is no off-ramp here, and this is the problem. So what else is Trump going to hit? Because they can't, destroy Iran. And so I think now they just say, let's just escalate, force the Iranians to the negotiation table. But all this will do is, create more tit for tat. It's going to make the U.S. go further up the escalation ladder and make it more difficult to wind this thing down. So I think they're all over the map now, and this is the problem of setting this kind of unattainable objectives, which then has to be changed.
Well, it certainly is all over the map, and I'm not sure how even in the mind of the White House president or his inner circle, I'm not sure how this can translate into anything positive. I mean, just as an example, here's just in the last 12 hours. We'll just keep it at that. I won't show the video, but last night on Fox News, you had Senator Josh Hawley, who's a big political ally of the president, all but declare that the war was over, that we had achieved everything. There's nothing else to destroy. We should just declare victory and just move on. And so I thought, let's see what happens the next day, because I thought that was a trial balloon where he was trying to see how that would resonate with people. And then the first thing this morning on Axios, Gary, if you could put that full screen up in there, we see it looked like it was a facilitation of that. It's like, they actually are going to go on with that. And according to Axios here in a phone conversation with the president this morning, that the war will end soon because there is practically nothing left to target. He said, little of this, little of that. Anytime I want, I can end it, and I will. And then he continues to talk about other kind of things in there. And Israel is not so excited about that. But that's what President Trump was saying. I'll end it soon. And if I want to, I'll just end it. Well, then he went on out in front of the White House, in front of the cameras here, just moments before we come on the air, and said this.
As you know, we're doing something that nobody ever thought was possible to do. Our military is the best. It's the most powerful in the world. And they're hitting them very hard. This is 47 years of abuse and killing lots of people, killing and maiming lots of people. What is it, Peter?
What more do you need to do militarily for this operation to end?
More of the same, and we'll see how that all comes out. Right now, they've lost their Navy, they've lost their Air Force, they have no anti-aircraft apparatus at all, they have no radar, their leaders are gone, and we could do a lot worse. We're leaving certain things that if we take them out, or we could take them out by this afternoon, in fact, within an hour, they literally would never be able to build that country back.
So that's number one. He didn't say anything in there about, there's nothing left to shoot. In fact, when he was asked, what is your strategy militarily? What do you need to do now? He just said, more of the same. So we're in day 12 here. And as you said, just before we even started this segment here, President Trump set the regime change as the top objective. They had a leader assassination. That didn't bring it back. Now it looks like we're just blowing up a bunch of stuff, and we have tremendous amount of firepower, and we can sure do that. But towards what end? Now it's like he's not even talking about, I want to end it anytime soon. Now we'll just keep going. What do you make of that?
Oh, well, the White House tweeted out something along the lines as well that, we've hit 5,500 targets. But that's not a strategy. That just means we were dropping a lot of bombs on people, creating a lot of death and destruction. But it has to serve a purpose, one would think. And again, there is a purpose as just spreading death and destruction. If you want to pressure the opponent into accepting a peace agreement or a ceasefire on favorable terms, this could be an objective. But Iran, this is considered to be an existential threat for them. That is, they know that the Israelis and the United States would like to destroy Iran. If any peace they agree to now would just be like the JCPOA, or any diplomatic efforts would be like June or the last one. It would just be a temporary pause before they have another go at it. So there's no point to just bombing Iran, because Iran's main objective here is to restore its deterrent, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That's why this doesn't make any sense, and time is really on Iran's side here, because the longer this drags on, the US will have its weapons begin to run out, and also the global economy will begin to grind to a halt, and the Iranians can do much more. If the US continues to escalate, the Iranians cannot just shut down the global economy, they can also continue to target the Gulf states. These are extremely vulnerable countries. They have they're family dictatorships, a little bit of bombing, and they cease to exist as financial centers. The majority of the population, which is often expats, will leave. Their energy, which they're completely dependent on, would also dry up. And so they can really make sure that these countries never recover if they would want to. So there's a lot of steps the Iranians can take up this escalation ladder. So this idea that, well, we'll just continue bombing them, it's nothing is achieved by just killing Iranians. Meanwhile, the Iranians can actually do something if they go up the escalation ladder in terms of bringing some pain to the United States. But the messaging, though, it's only was yesterday or 2 days ago, Trump went out on Truth Social, this other Twitter, and tweeted that we're going to bomb Iran so hard that the nation will never be able to rebuild. So essentially now he's into the business of destroying nations. And then the next day we see another message going that, he wants to make Iran great again. We're going to rebuild it, make it more prosperous than ever. Which one is it? Because either you destroy Iran, it can never recover as a nation, or you want to make it great again. But the only difference was premised on whether or not they can achieve regime change, which they can't. So I don't understand this messaging at all. It's a little bit like Marco Rubio trying to make the case for why this attack was legal by suggesting, well, if Israel attacks Iran, Iran would have retaliated against us. And then he's asked, well, does that mean that Israel pulled us into the war? Because that's pretty much the definition of it. And then, no, that's not it. I didn't say that. So there's no narrative. Usually one puts a lot of work into this. I always make the point, at least during the Iraq War, all the politicians, all the journalists, they were trying to march in lockstep. They were saying, weapons of mass destruction. We can't let what is it? A smoking gun be a nuclear bomb? I mean, everyone had the same talking points. Not this time. This is just, it's as poorly planned as the war itself. The narrative that is.
That's a good point there. And of course, we can also throw in there what it was, a Saturday or Friday. I can't remember which day it came out. Unconditional surrender. That's what President Trump said. That was the objective then, that they had to completely and totally capitulate. When Caroline Leavitt was asked, I think a day later, what was the definition of that and how long the war would go to achieve that, she said, well, the war will go on until President Trump declares that it's over, no matter what the Iranians say. And they say, what? You can't have an unconditional surrender if the other party doesn't surrender. So there is no conditional or otherwise if they don't play. So it was never explained, that incongruity. Getting back to what President Trump, in that same press conference there, or that same press gaggle, there was the question brought up about the Strait of Hormuz. You mentioned something about the oil. President Trump addressed it.
You talk to the CEOs of various oil companies, encouraging them to use the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, I think they should. I think they should. I think they should use it. In my opinion, look, we took out just about all of their mine ships in one night. We're up to boat number 60. I didn't realize that big a Navy. I would say it was big and ineffective. But every one of their ships, just about all of their Navy is gone at the bottom of the sea.
So what do you make of that? Yeah, I think everybody should just start going through the Gulf here, no matter what the Iranians say. The IRGC this morning, their commander said, by the way, I said it at the beginning, I will repeat it again here. Nobody can use the Gulf unless we give them permission to do so. And apparently they have given some permission. Other ships have already been attacked. Some have been caught on fire. What do you make of his admonition there that oil companies should start going through the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, it's not that easy. The ships, they need insurances. No one's going to give them insurances if ships are blowing up. That's just bad business. So, no, I think, well, it doesn't make much sense, really. And I think he's more committed to the narrative that that has been some kind of victory. And of course, he's very desperate to save the economy as well, because this is something that will put immense pressure on him. This is why, he also tried to talk down the oil prices, which temporarily worked. That is saying that this war would soon be over. Well, if war is over by unconditional surrender on the side of the Iranians, then it's not going to be over anytime soon. But also, I guess the premise here is all flawed, because we took out their navy. Now they can't block the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this is a very narrow strait, and you don't really need that much sophisticated weapons to close it. That is, that the Iranians can close it with very simple and cheap weapons, which can essentially be built in apartment buildings. That is, drones. They are easy, they're cheap, and they're enough to stop a lot of the shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz. You have naval drones, like little torpedo-shaped drones, which are also relatively cheap to make, which can just be sent across the Strait of Hormuz to sink whatever ship tries to come through. So this idea that we sank some warships, now we are in control, it doesn't really make any sense if you consider the technologies and weapons that can be used by the Iranians. And raining on Trump's parade is the reports today that Iranians are now mining the Strait of Hormuz. So how is that possible? He just said that they no longer had the capability to do this. So it's just Trump being Trump, I guess. He says a lot of words, which doesn't necessarily mean anything.
So obviously, when you're in a war like this, the public statements by everybody has to be taken not even just with a grain of salt, but viewed skeptically, because people will promote whatever viewpoint they want people to understand and to believe, so that it helps their cause in any way. But on that point, so there's President Trump giving his view. Well, there was on Dropsite News today, there was an interview with a political analyst at the University of Tehran, who he claims that if Iran wanted to, they could keep the strait shut down for 6 months. Do you think that's just empty rhetoric, that they can do that, or do you think they really can do it?
No, I think they can. I mean, if you look at the strait, this is a huge territory which is Iranian. of course, the United States could try to seize the territory, create a bit of a buffer, but they would need a large amount of troops, and it's not very friendly territory and region ever as well. And beyond this, how would they be supplied over time, given how vulnerable they are? And if they would put together such a mission, this should have been done again months ago during the planning, not midway into this war when things are going wrong. So I think the Iranians possibly could, because, as I said, the territory is large, but also the Iranians have a massive population of 90 million people. They prepared for this. I mean, speaking of the Iraq War, I remember again back in 2003 when they were also put on the list of this axis of evil. Actually, that was before 2003 by George Bush. So they've been preparing. They know that they've been on the list of countries to be knocked out. Indeed, if you remember back, I think it was 2006 or 7, General Wesley Clark, he gave this speech where he remembered after the attacks on September 11 that they've decided to go to war with Iraq, and he made this famous speech that the U.S. had planned to take out 7 countries in 5 years, and Iran, it would be the ultimate big prize at the end. This is the how we finish off this party, essentially. So the Iranians know that they've been on the menu for quite a long time, so they prepared for this, and the Strait of Hormuz is a key card they can play, because this brings a lot of pain to the United States. It shuts down all the Gulf nations, which essentially are frontline states against Iran, which enables America to do what it's doing now. So it has a lot it can do, and it's planned this for a while. So I don't doubt that they can keep this going for months.
Well, and that's going to be a big problem. Now, a lot of the Western media, a lot of the American media in particular, especially on the conservative media, has just been nothing but nonstop cheerleading for President Trump since this thing started. A lot of them were advocating and begging him to go to war all before that. We've shown those to you on several of the times we've had you on the show. Well, there was a bit of retrospection or introspection, I suppose, this morning from a former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who went on Fox News and says, you know what? We've got 3 big problems here.
There are 3 huge challenges that this administration has tackled. They have to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. Keeping the Strait open is the number one job because it buys you time to other jobs. The second job is we're going to discover that the Revolutionary Guard is tougher than we thought it was, better connected, and have at least 200,000 people who are true believers, and they have no future. Trump can say unconditional surrender. Right. These folks know if they lose power, they have no future. And the third challenge is, how do you arouse and organize the 85 million or so people in Iran who do not want the current regime, but they're unarmed, they're unorganized? That has to be solved. These 3 problems are going to decide whether this was a stroke of genius or, frankly, a step into quicksand.
Step into quicksand. I think we know where this is going to end up here, but let's take a look at those 3 things in order here, because the first one is the one we were just talking about, the Strait of Hormuz. But it's interesting because he said we've got to keep the strait open. The strait isn't open right now. You've got to get it back open. President Trump was just saying, well, I think people should just go through it. But you have the IRGC saying, no, nobody's going through it unless I say so. You've got to change that. So let's stop on point number 1. Do you see that the United States, with its enormous military power, especially its naval power, can we force open the Strait of Hormuz?
No, if they could, they would have. And I just don't see it happening. And this is, again, why the Iranian complicated further by laying mines there. Because how exactly are we going to carry through such an operation? I mean, I should ask you, you're the military man, but it's incredibly difficult. And again, this is why the US is also careful to have its Navy get too close as well, because they don't want it struck by Iran. And the problem here is that it's a different age we're living in. It's the age of drones. It's relatively cheap weapons which can be used to, if you have a cheap drone which can then attack a aircraft carrier, it's a very different reality. But overall, besides trying to open up the Strait of Hormuz, the idea that the Iranian military, that they weren't going to support their nation, the idea that you just kill off their leader and then somehow everyone, they just fear this 86-year-old man so much, but now that he's dead, now they'll take to the street. it very predictably achieved the opposite. And we mix up our propaganda with reality. It's always attractive to present the leader of a rival country as being, just keeping his country hostage and being just pure evil, and they will celebrate us as liberators, a little bit like Iraq again, once we kill him. But this isn't happening. Same as the people. The idea that 85 million out of 90 million people in Iran would celebrate the government collapsing. This is an absurd proposition. Where does these numbers come from? I mean, I think they're overestimating how unpopular the government is. It's not that unpopular. Of course, many people do not care for it, but the way it's presented is kind of extreme. But I think also, if you want to win over the public, this is another area where the narrative is important, because so far we had people like a lot of people suggesting that we have to take control of Iran's oil. This is the main priority. Like Lindsey Graham saying that we're going to make a ton of money once Iran is defeated. Some are saying we have to control the Strait of Hormuz. Others say no, this is all about nuclear weapons. No, it's ballistic missiles. No, we're helping protesters, or we're liberating women. But you have to kind of stick to one, because once one starts to incinerate the capital by destroying all the fuel depot, then obviously the idea of liberating Iran is no longer, it doesn't seem convincing. Once one bombs a school and kills 160 small girls, it doesn't seem like liberating women is the strategy. So, the military actions have to reflect or be consistent with the narrative being sold. So a lot of people who probably didn't like the government, nonetheless, they don't want to see their country being burned down. So when Trump goes out and tweets, Iran will never be able to rebuild as a nation again, they perhaps wanted a different government, different policies, more moderate. They don't want to see their nation destroyed, a proud nation, 3,000 years old. It's again, it goes back to the narrative, the military actions. They should go hand in hand. We're not seeing that at all.
No, and in fact, one of the other problems that he mentioned in that the second of the 3 points, I found a little puzzling. And it's one thing if it's Newt Gingrich. I mean, he's a politician. He's really keyed in with what's happening politically on the Capitol Hill and all that. But he's also tied in close with the administration. And what I worry is that what he said is shared by others on the Hill. And my eyes got a little bit bigger when he said, well, I think we underestimated the IRGC. We didn't know that they would be this firm. And I'm thinking, you can't be serious. How would you not think that the IRGC was going to be, fighting with the regime, with the government, that they were actually going to be formidable? Now, you've been covering this issue for a long time. Does it surprise you that the IRGC has been firm?
No. And again, it should have been evident to everyone. I think, again, that we're often deluded by our own propaganda. Indeed, before this war as well, I had many people on my podcast which I interviewed, both Americans, Iranians, and others, and there was a common understanding that exactly how Iran would respond. First of all, yes, its military would fight back in a big way. The public wouldn't turn on its own government when bombed, and also how Iran would respond. It would likely attack all U.S. bases in the region. It would try to punish the Gulf states, anyone who helped it. It would attack Israel, and it would impose economic cost on the U.S. and its allies by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, all of this almost consensus that this is what makes sense. But why did it make sense? Because one recognizes that this is an existential threat to Iran that is being destroyed. Even regime change means the destruction of Iran, because there is no replacement government waiting in the back that can be thrown in and enjoy popular support, because it doesn't exist. Now, the reason why I think they get all this wrong is because their narrative was something else. It was the government was immensely unpopular. Nobody wanted it. This is what you need to legitimize war, but then that results in very poor policies. It suggested that Iran didn't fear for its existence because we didn't want to destroy Iran. We just wanted to, liberate little girls and bring freedom and democracy, which the people would welcome. So given that how the war is sold and the way Iran is presented, this poor analysis, it produces very poor policies. And we're seeing the result of this.
One of the third thing he mentioned there, you've touched on a little bit here, but I want to go down that path a little bit more because it's being mentioned in more than one case today. The idea ahead of this time, ahead of the strike, was going to be that we were going to enable the people to rise up. Lindsey Graham was famous for saying, these poor protesters, President Trump, protesters in January, I'm sorry, the help is on the way. Keep going, rise up. We're going to come in and help you. And so that was the idea. Well, obviously that didn't happen when the Ayatollah was assassinated. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we've given up. Now, Newt Gingrich said that there are three things that if we don't get all three of them right, it's going to be that we've stepped into quicksand. Well, I think that we're up to our knees now going down into quicksand, but that we haven't given up on that third one yet. Trey Yingst was on Fox News earlier today, and he says that there are clearly things going on behind the scenes that indicates Americans and the Israelis want to empower the Iranian civilians who are against the regime. So it's like we haven't given up on that hope. But if we haven't seen it in 12 days, and in what we have seen is lots of very large protests pro-government, especially when those children that you referred to, when they had this mass ceremony, sort of a procession, millions of people came out around the country here. Do you think that there is still a chance at this late hour that somehow with the right policy or incentives that America and Israel could get the people in Iran to rise up and do on the ground what we don't have a ground force to do?
No, not at all. Because, well, first of all, I think they overestimated how unpopular the government is. I don't think it is as popular as they pretend. And also, this is a problem by overselling this protest which took place. How many people were killed? Who was actually doing the rioting? So no, I just don't see it. I don't see it happening. And if there hasn't been a regime change, people hasn't stood up. Why would they do it now after the U.S. attacked this desalination plant, this access to water, war crime after destroying the fuel depots in Tehran, which has caused this toxic, acid rain, which burns, the skin and the lungs. This might cause cancer for decades to come. Why? I saw even I forgot who it was. I think it was the head of CPAC who made a comment, more or less suggesting that it's better for these 160 girls to have died than to be in burqas. Iranians don't even wear burqas. That's more of a Sunni phenomenon. I was in Iran last year in May. It is portrayed as the Shia version of the Taliban. It's really not. You have women walking around. Some cover their hair, some do not. Some wear jeans and small T-shirts. Others do not. I mean, it's the way it's portrayed. I think it's very, it's too far from reality. And I always think about people like George Kennan and John F. Kennedy, because they were making these warnings. Don't hate your opponents. When they talked about the Soviets, they were worried that that the hatred of the opponent led to this very vile and unrealistic expectations about who they were. And one should always respect one's opponent, even if the goal is to defeat them, because at least then you have some realistic expectations about the society, their history, the complexity, instead of forming these cartoonish views that it's just in every war we have a bad man who's just ruling over a country, of a captive country, and if we can just kill the bad man, get rid of him, then everything will go back to peace and order. It's it's how you would explain politics to a child or a fanatic. Yet this is what we do in every war. I mean, all of the political West. Every time we have a conflict, it's with another reincarnation of Hitler. It's always one bad man, and if we can just get rid of him, and we're always fighting for the people we're bombing, because we're just going after that one guy. It's a very strange way of looking at, an immature way of looking at politics. So no,
yeah, and it doesn't resonate well on the ground either. So it doesn't accomplish your objectives. Whatever you're thinking it's going to do, it resolutely fails. So it seems like at some point people would wake up and say, that's not helpful to even my own, even if it's a moral idea, that's not helpful. Stop doing it. But we don't.
But if I can, I don't think it's a bad idea to use proxies. One often does this. I remember when I was in the army, when when NATO attacked Yugoslavia in '99, they used the Albanians as proxies. Not that I would condone, but from a strategic perspective, it made sense. You have a lot of ground troops in Iraq. They could use the Kurds, same as in Syria. So of course, the big prize was always Ukraine, with a proxy army of hundreds of thousands who, Zelensky has said, they would fight to the last man. All of this is a strategy or tactic in war. But I don't see this happening in Iran either, because it looked as if, maybe we can pull in the Kurds. But now that it seems, Iranian government hasn't been toppled in the first week, it looks stronger. Why would they put themselves out on a limb if they're going to be punished thereafter? Azerbaijan, they were hit by a drone. The Iranians insisted this was not us. And, they were going to retaliate. Suddenly the retaliation is not forthcoming. And instead, the Azerbaijanis are sending humanitarian aid to the Iranians. So you're not betting on a losing horse. You want to accept reality. And as I said, with Lindsey Graham, he essentially told he was on the news, on Fox News or something, and also on Twitter, essentially warning Saudi Arabia against consequences unless they join the war against Iran, because they have a formidable army. Why aren't you joining the war with us? I mean, they can't get the proxies, and this is part of the problem. If Iran looked like it was on his back foot, it was going to go down, everyone would join in.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to join in on a losing war. Even the British are now saying, oof, right, maybe not for us.
Right. You mentioned earlier, because all this kind of ties in together, you mentioned earlier that time is not on our side, time is on Iran's side. And many people in the United States, that would be strange to them, because they think, what are you talking about? Time is on our side. We're not in an existential strike. We have all kinds. According to President Trump, we have an unlimited amount of ammunition. We can do this all day long. We can keep dropping it. But when you start looking at some of the fundamentals underneath, turns out that time is not exactly on Trump's side specifically, and that's the only guy that matters. Let's look first at the politics. This is from this morning. President Trump is 38 points underwater, and that's where it's showing you. Even in George Bush, in his second term, it was terribly unpopular because of the Iraq war and how bad it was. He was only 26 points underwater. And you say Obama practically, at the top of the list, only underwater by 18 points. That's where it is right now. Now, if this war starts going south and like we start to fail, and especially unlike the Iraq war, this one could have costs and implications for the domestic audience. If the strait stays shut, and that looks to be one of the primary intentions of the Iranian side, and it starts causing economic pain to everybody in America, you can imagine that's going to be like a submarine. It's going to go down deeper pretty quick. Trump is keenly aware of that, and especially heading into the midterms, that's a huge issue. So maybe that's part of the reason why we're getting these scatter shooting and often contradictory statements in just the last 2 or 3 days from Trump about where he's going with this war. But what can he do? Because I think Newt Gingrich was right. I think he stepped into some quicksand and he's going down fast. What are his options right now?
Well, it doesn't have that many options, really. And this is, I think, I agree with Gingrich on this, that the Strait of Hormuz is the critical part, because this is what can give the United States time or not. But because they can't control the Strait of Hormuz, this puts time on Iran's side. And as you said, there's many weak points that Trump has to take into consideration. One is the domestic politics, which doesn't look good. It's the economics, obviously, as this has been his main selling point. Is the great deal maker who would make the economy hotter than ever. But of course, also on the battlefield, the Iranians are able to strike bases and key nodes, which shuts down logistics. Also, this idea of unlimited weapons. I saw when Trump tweeted this out, that they had unlimited weapons. That was on the same day as the South Korean media announced that the Americans were pulling the THAADs and Patriots out of South Korea to send it to the Middle East. So something doesn't sound about right. But also the wider political message of Trump staying out of the forever wars. I mean, he promised no forever wars. He went away from being a peace president to instead going for quick victories. That is, quick in and out and have something to show for. But this is going to be a forever war with all costs as the other ones and not much to show for thereafter. So this is a disaster in many ways. So what can he do? I think that now, I mean, the best thing he can do is de-escalate, try to go down that escalation ladder. He's done it before, though. He did it in Yemen because, he's going to go in, defeat Yemen and then the Houthis, as we call them, and he wasn't successful. And, once defeated, he just declared victory and walked away. And, that was the best thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do, but that's what he did. And that's one of his strengths. He lies a lot and he tends to get away with it. So if he says, we degraded their ballistic missiles, we sank their navy, all of this, chest beating, and now we're done, victory, that.
Well, here's the problem with that, though. We actually talked about that with Larry Johnson earlier today, and we actually brought up Secretary Hegseth's statement on, I want to say it was the 6th of March, or was in March of 2025, where he just like pounded the desk and said, we are going to shut down, we are going to be relentless against the Houthis, and we will not stop until they stop intercepting traffic through the Red Sea, et cetera. And then we showed President Trump do exactly what you said in May, just about 7 or 8 weeks later. And he just declared victory. Well, they begged us to stop shooting, so we decided to do it. You can just walk away from that. There's no cost to it. But right now, the Gulf is still closed. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. So Trump can't just declare victory and walk away this time unless he gets that Gulf open. And do you see any prospect that the Iranians would say, okay, if you stop shooting at us, then we'll open the Gulf up, which will relieve the pressure on Trump?
No, and I think this is why, if you want to know his options, if you want to find a deal with the Iranians in which Trump can walk away as a victor, you need a deal with the Iranians. This is hard to do. So the best course of action would be pick up the phone and call President Putin and have him work as a middleman. And that's exactly what Trump did, which makes sense. But one has to also ask what Iran wants. I mean, Iran is not a puppet of Russia, and even if Russia would put pressure on Iran, how much pressure would they be willing to put? And also, Iran has its own interest. It's not a master and slave relationship here. So what Iran wants is to make sure that this never happens again. And ideally, there would be some kind of a peace agreement in which all sanctions are lifted on Iran, in which essentially the goal of destroying Iran would be taken off the table. The problem is diplomacy needs some trust. In the last 2 negotiations, even though both sides and the mediator was arguing that they were close to a deal, nonetheless, it was used for a surprise attack. So it's not much trust anymore. And again, there's a lot of parallels here to the Russian case, because if the Iranians can't get what they want, that is security through diplomacy, then they will use it through military force. And that means to force the US out, that is to destroy all its military bases and assets. Even Iraq, when the Iraqi parliament have asked the US and its allies to leave more than once, and they're not leaving. Well, now if all the bases are blown up, maybe they will. So there's going to be a lot of push now to force the Americans out, and this is part of the problem by using diplomacy in such a deceptive way, only to try to knock out the adversary. The reason I said there's a lot of similarities to Russia is Russia wants the same. They say, we want security, we want to make sure this never happens again, that you use Ukraine as a proxy. We want complete decoupling. If we can't get that on the negotiation table, then we'll get it on the battlefield. And that means we're going to strip Ukraine of all its territories, which are strategic. That means everything from Kharkov to Odessa. We're going to destroy all the infrastructure and make the rest of it a basket case, incapable of functioning as a frontline state for NATO. So this is the disaster. Once there's not a diplomatic path, you're going to have a military path. And I just don't see a clear diplomatic path, given that there's no trust.
So let's take a look at the potential differences between the two. Obviously, Iran doesn't have a military like the Russians do that can compel military victory on their terms, but they are not without leverage here, which a lot of what we talked about here. But what could Iran even do? What is in the realm of possibility, as far as you understand, from a diplomatic perspective, that they could get from us to give Trump what he's looking for, which is an end to the active conflict that they could trust that they're not going to figure it's going to come back in? Because to me, it seems like they would have to have a lot. Otherwise, as you just pointed out, and they have reiterated here just in the last couple of days, you lied to us so much in these other, just in the 25 and 26 negotiations. Why would we ever give you what you're looking for as a relief of the pressure to help you domestically, unless we get something really meaningful? But then the concurrent with that, though, Trump may want to, if whatever you're going to tell me you think is in the realm of possibility, but for Trump to be willing to give anything that's positive, like relief of sanctions or anything else, I don't know how he's going to do that. This seems really to be hard to me, and we're only at the 12-day mark.
Yeah, but no, that's why I think it's very difficult. One can say, well, we can cement this into international agreements, which pull in other actors as well, so we will have more credibility. But we've done this. That was the JCPOA. There was supposed to be reduced pressure on Iran. This didn't happen. And at the end of the day, the inspectors from the IAEA only gave targeting data to the Israelis and the United States. And it was the United States that pulled away. And there's the important part. Once the US pulled out, they essentially forced the Europeans to also pull out and reimpose sanctions on Iran. So any deal that comes into place, it can just be canceled in a few months from now. So it's no. So I think this is the problem when there's no trust. I mean, trust is important. This is kind of the lubricant which make deals work. If you believe that the other side will act according to agreements, but now
Right.
there's
So in
some
the absence of that, and let's agree that it's dead right now. What can Iran? What would they want if they can get everything that they're asking for to bring this to an end? What is even reasonable for them, rational for them to ask for?
Honestly, I think the only thing that would work, to be honest, is a Palestinian state. And the reason for it, this is the source of a lot of the conflicts. This is why you have what they call this is why they have their resistance. So this is why the Iranians are supporting Hamas. This is why they're also supporting Hezbollah. This is why they need this partnership with the Houthis. If you can get rid of the source of the conflict, that is why Iran is considered to be a threat to the United States and Israel, then I think something like this could be it, because otherwise, the struggle would continue. The Israelis and the Iranians would be at each other again. The U.S. would, of course, align with the Israelis, and everything would just continue. To use the Russian language, you have to address the root causes, and the absence of a Palestinian state, I think that is a key part of the root cause here. So, but again, that's not going to happen. That's a bit too much. But you said
I can imagine that's not lost on the Israelis,
Yeah.
who would suffer the brunt of that cost, because that is just anathema to them to ever do that. And Netanyahu, like 4 weeks ago, just categorically said there will never be a Palestinian state. He said that in Hebrew, didn't get any coverage on the Western media that I saw, but it sure did to his folks there. So how is he going to go back there? You see what I'm saying? Every time we have a possibility, there's like a concrete roadblock. How do we figure this out?
No, but no, I admit that's not going to happen. But if there was a political will to find some broader peace agreement, perhaps that could be enough based on something else. Because, for example, back I forgot when the Chinese were mediating this rapprochement between the Saudis, UAE, and Iran, trying to improve relations. For the Chinese, this made sense because they wanted, they wanted to trade with both sides. That helps if they're not in conflict.
Right.
And at that point, the former head of Mossad, I forgot his name, he went out in the media and he was making the point that, listen, if the anti-Iranian alliance is going to fall apart, then we could also make a peace with the Iranians. We don't even share a border. It could be possible to find a peace. Because now no one talks about it. They only talk about defeating the adversary. I think if we could end up in a point like this, a wider agreement, perhaps. But at the moment, if you were sitting in Tehran and Trump wants a peace, what would you think? It's exactly like the 12-day war. That is, right. Try to bomb as much as kind of Iran. It doesn't work. Okay, well then you declare victory. You pull back. You obliterated this and that, and and then you regroup, restock your missiles, come back after a few months, and have another go at it. The Iranians won't have it, so they need some reassurance that this won't happen again. What that reassurance is beyond me, because there is no trust anymore.
And that just really underscores the problem. But then that gets to, okay, so you've got the Israeli component, the Iranian component, and the American component, and they've all got some overlapping, some radically contradictory desires. So it's hard to even conceive of any kind of a jointly acceptable outcome to this, because then it seems to me that in some regards it is similar to the Russia-Ukraine war, in that Russia had its negotiating stance, and we'll just pick the one. Obviously, the thing fell apart in April of 2022, but let's go to June 2024. So at that point, Russia said, here is our plan, neutrality for Ukraine, no NATO in it, the demilitarization, denazification, then the war can be over, these territories, etc. That's it, and just laid it very concisely out. And of course, the Ukraine side didn't accept it. So then over the next year and a half or so, Putin kept saying, all right, we're going to, the terms are still on the table, because that addresses the root causes, and it also addresses our security requirements going forward. If you meet these, then we'll have it. But the Ukraine side, and so he says to try to get that, then they just had this relentless ground campaign and air campaign to just try to pummel and make the pain so high on the Ukraine side that it would make them concede to these points. That's what seems to be in the mind, anyway, of all sides right now, because they all want to put enough pain on the other side that they compel and give in and submit to whatever the other side wants. But right now, it seems to me that the Iranians can continue to do this for a long time. I don't know how long, but a lot longer than 12 days. The American side, we have the capacity, but we don't have the political will, because this is not existential for us. Israel, definitely existential, and I think they would rather die than to give in on these. So you seem to have all these people entrenched in, and then the wild card is us right here, and we're not out. But if we falter and back off, then there's going to be real problems for Israel too, because they can't keep going on without our extreme help for here. How do you see that playing out? Because that implies, and this is, I guess, my specific question here, this implies that this war is not only not about to end, but it could go on for many months to come. How do you see it?
No, I agree, and in a strategic setting, this is what as always would be in chapter 1, is you don't want a situation where the strategic outcome is all or nothing, because that makes countries willing to go to great length and make great sacrifices and take great risks. So if you want to compare the Russian and the Iranian case, the problem with the war in Ukraine is, again, it's an existential threat for Russia. It's also an existential threat for Ukraine. For the Europeans, if they can defeat the Russians, the Americans will stay. They will have a powerful Ukrainian shield in front of them, and Russia would have to bend to their will. Europe can remain relevant. If they lose, Russia wins, America will pivot away from Europe. Ukraine would, much of its territory would be absorbed by Russia. It would no longer be in the NATO or European orbit. And as I think it was the Polish foreign minister said, if we lose this war, this is a war for relevance, because if we lose, the Americans will prefer to cooperate with the Russians instead of us. So, this is why it's extreme. It's all or nothing for all the main parties. Now with Iran, it's the same. Iran now can finally break out of this. That is, if it's victorious, it can have the Gulf states permanently weakened. They will, if they want to remain, alive, they would have to then begin to decouple themselves from the United States. Don't be frontline states. Iran would then emerge as a massive regional power. Meanwhile, for Israel, if it loses, the U.S. might be forced to not leave the region, but its footprint would be diminished, and the ability of Israel to project power, because its regional dominance always harmonizes with America's aspiration for global dominance. But now this becomes decoupled. So everyone is, fighting for everything or nothing at the moment, which is why it's so extremely dangerous. And these wars should never happen at all. But of course, all of these strategic considerations should be taken into place before starting these wars. But again, the narratives and the media, which is now part of the problem, is suggest that we just wanted to bring democracy and freedom to these countries. So there's no strategy then. It's just this empty normative talk.
Well, this just, the more you look at down any one of these and follow this twine down, the more complex and intertwined and complicated it gets, which implies that this is not going anywhere anytime soon. So the question is, though, of all the players, how long do you think Iran can actually function here, stay as a viable state, to keep enduring all of this blitzkrieg that President Trump again threatened there in the beginning? Is more is yet to come. It can keep getting worse. How long can they endure under that, still keep the straits shut down, and still be able to be viable to fire back missiles and drones in the other direction? Because it seems like they have the least longevity, I guess you could say. How do you see that?
Well, it's hard to tell because it would be too many speculations. I don't know how much weapons they have. I mean, they have every incentive in the world to exaggerate how many tunnels they have full of weapons, but apparently they do have a lot. So, but again, I don't know how much weapons they have stored up. It's uncertain. It's unclear to me if there's any divisions or splits within the ranks of power. If knock out the top echelon, will some divisions emerge, the one below. The extent to which the economic punishment will impact society and the political system, because they are taking quite a powerful economic hit.
Like using the same weapon, the exact same weapon.
Or it looks like we got a live here from President Trump. Let's listen to what he has to say.
In the water, we have, as an example, we had tremendous drugs pouring in through the water, through the sea, and now we have almost none. It's down 97% through water. Now we'll do it through land. The land is easier than water. But this is a great honor being here. It's a great company. I've known it for a long time. And you have done a fantastic job. And I'd like to congratulate you.
Thank you. It's the colleagues' work.
See the colleague. Talks about himself.
Okay, guess we missed on those. Now he's going on to something else in there. Getting back to the conversation we were at here, the question is, how long can Iran remain viable? Now, we had some information out. Somebody did some analysis earlier today, said if they had as few as 20,000 of these drones, and one would imagine that they had a lot more than that, but if they had at least 20, that could get them about 10 months of sustainment. But from what is your understanding or your estimation, maybe a better word to put it, on the domestic issue? Because with hitting all these targets throughout Iran, it's going to impact their ability to just function. I mean, to be able to have an economy, for people to have jobs, to make money, to buy food, to pay their rent, etc. I mean, is that a concern that may be even more important than how many drones they could have?
No, these are the different variables. As I said, it's not just the weapons they have in storage, it's also the industrial capacity to create more. And again, if they rely on cheap drones, this kind of stuff can be almost manufactured out of apartments. Not, of course, the large Shahid drones, but you don't need... But there's a lot of potential there to ramp up industrial production. It depends on the foreign support, and I think on this it's kind of stable because neither the Chinese nor the Russians could afford to see Iran collapse. You have the economic issue, which is important. That this is important also for social cohesion. To what extent can society sustain this over a period of time, and of course, how stable is the political system? And I think, it becomes too many variables and too complex to predict exactly how they're going to do over a prolonged period of time. But I suspect, as in the advantage that Iran has is they were attacked, they're already at home. Where are they going to go? So I think all they have to do is essentially absorb the pain which is brought to them, and make sure that they have the ability to project some pain the other way. And as if now the time proves to be on Iran's side, and they will be able to essentially push back the United States, punish these countries who have aided in this, a lot of brutal, really ruthless attack on Iran, then this is going to give a massive amount of credibility to Iran, and not just domestically, but around the world. I mean, the way that Iran is covered, seen in the world now, is very different than it was in the past. This is yes, part of this reason was the surprise attack back in June. It generated a lot of sympathy for Iran, which it never really had. I mean, I remember, back around the Iraq War, it was almost a consensus across the West that Iran was essentially the devil, the ultimate bad guy. People don't see Iran this way anymore, and so I think that a lot of what the U.S. has done has undermined this. And if this is how the world is beginning to see Iran, within Iran, the image is quite different as well. And I think this was obviously the miscalculation of it. For example, killing Khamenei. Well, all it did was create a lot of sympathy within Iran. A lot of people who came out, like, nobody wants to see their leader assassinated by a foreign power. Yeah. So no, I again, beyond the material power, one has to also recognize the powerful ideas such as nationalism. That is, we're all humans who organize in groups. A nation is our tribe. If our tribe is attacked from outside, we're going to rally around the flag. We're going to stick to our own. So whatever internal divisions there were, these are essentially overridden by the larger problem at hand.
Yeah. Listen, in the last few minutes we got here, let me ask you a question, because it's entirely possible that the clock could be on Iran's side if they can stretch this out. I mean, let's say that minimum analysis I had was right, and they can at least at current rates, even, and without even reducing their amount of fire. I think it was the estimate of about 3,000 drone fires per month throughout the region there. They can manage that for about 10 months. Well, 8 months from now is the American midterms. And if nothing is done to solve this, if President Trump can't bring it to an end, if he can't get a negotiated end, if he can't get the Strait of Hormuz open, we can't last that long. I mean, our economy will just start to implode if you get this stretched on not to 12 days, but to, a month, 2 months, 3 months, and there's no end in sight, and the strait's not open. I mean, the oil will be 150, 160, who knows how much it could go up to at that. And that is going to devastate the electorate here, who already aren't happy. Gary put that graphic up that showed that already at this early stage, there's only 40-something% of the American people that are supportive of this. And so that will only go down even further. So that clock is there. So then that's one issue that Trump has, is going to be in a real problem here. Let me ask you a wild card, though. One of the reasons we said we were going to go in this is to prevent Iran from getting a bomb. According to Steve Witkoff, the Iranian side admitted what we had Ted Postal said on our show last July, that they had 400 and something grams of reprocessed 60% material from which they could make 10 or 11 bombs. Let's say that now then, because we have gone in and bombed them, of course, there's no inspectors or anything else like that. At some point in the next month or two, all of a sudden they either announce they have a nuclear bomb or they demonstrate one by having an underground test of some sort. What would that do to change the dynamics if all of a sudden they become the very nuclear power we always were afraid they could be?
Well, first, let me just a quick comment on the Strait of Hormuz. I think many people were surprised how the Iranians shut it down on the first week already. But there was a reason behind this. This was because they knew that this was a war for existence. So they knew that bringing the pain on early was required, because this is essentially what will make the US back off after a while. Now, regarding the nuclear weapon, I think that, this is a bigger possibility now. I remember Postol, I spoke to him as well, actually, and he was making the point that it would be in the interest now of Iran to become at least a threshold state or an undeclared nuclear weapons power. That is a bit like Israel developed these nukes, but don't tell anyone. Simply because, well, when I spoke to him after the 12-day war, it was obvious that the US and Israelis would come back. So you need the ultimate deterrent. Well, you don't necessarily need it, but one of the things which stood in its way was, first of all, Khamenei, which said that it went against their faith, that is of the Shiites, to have nuclear weapons. Well, he's dead now. He was killed, and now his son has taken over. He's not as moderate, and of course, the US just killed his father, his mother, his sister, his wife, and his kid. And he might, of course, seen his capital being torched. So he might have a different feeling towards this. Second is the goal which the US and Israel put forth. This is to degrade the ballistic missile capabilities of Iran. You know, if you have a big regional power like Iran, you want them to have a conventional deterrence. If they don't have a conventional deterrence, how do you expect to survive? Then you need a nuclear deterrent. So I think a lot of things were going our way. They had a religious, cultural practice that said we can't have nuclear weapons. They had a powerful conventional deterrent, which meant they didn't need a nuclear weapon. Now, of course, we're stripping them of these things and also making it clear you will never actually have peace because essentially we're going to burn down your nation and make sure you can't rebuild. All the cases are now made for a nuclear weapon. So if the Iranian gets a nuclear weapon, and it would be easy to make an argument for why they should. I hope they don't, but it would be an argument for why they should. The dynamic would change fundamentally. Now, the cost of going to war would be much more dangerous, especially for the people who buy into the rhetoric that Iran are irrational, because then you certainly don't attack a country with nuclear weapons.
Wow, that it's just incalculable what could happen if that happens, especially as it would only come as a result of our actions, that we push them into the very thing we claimed to want to prevent. We'll have to just leave that in the realm of the theoretical today, but we will be watching.
Very short thing. Yeah. Sorry. Well, one of the horrible lessons we learned, taught the world as well, was if you're a country like Pakistan or South or North Korea, then if you acquire nuclear weapons, you're safe. If you're like Libya or Iraq, who abandons a weapons program, you're destroyed. The Iranians probably picked up on this lesson as well. So sorry for interrupting you.
No, not at all. That's part of the danger of having this gunboat diplomacy kind of brigandish sort of. We're going to bully everybody and demand everything we want. We're giving incentive for other people to have counteractions, and I don't know why we don't learn this self-evident lesson throughout history, but here we are. But in any case, we are very grateful to you, as we always are, for bringing clarity to these issues. Of course, like I said at the beginning, Glenn has a great YouTube channel that's just on fire these days. It's just people turning in left and right because he has such great analysis and a lot of great guests. Recommend you go find him right there on YouTube. And also, I guess you're also on Substack, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, also got a Substack out there. So a lot of ways to find Glenn Diesen. We always appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
And we thank you guys too. We appreciate you. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done it already. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Got some more great shows for you on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with somebody you love.